You know, I get comments at times, yeah, and I get the usual ones, you're jealous of Sanford and this and that and the other thing. But on occasion, I get comments that are very thought provoking, and I'm saying this in all sincerity. I'm not being sarcastic. They're very thought provoking because it offers up something what I like to call a matter of perspective, how different people can view things differently. You know, I don't know who you are, but you left that comment. I'm glad you did. Uh, I'm glad you left that comment about my video on junk is the new good, and he was saying well 305 and me, I like big engines, big inch engines. Uh, that's what I had in all four of my cars, and like I say, there's no replacement for displacement. And that can be a subject of debate for many people. Oh yeah, you can do a lot of small block. Look what Bill Jenkins did with his 327 running against Hemis. In his Vega. If I'm not mistaken, wasn't it him? He's the one that got this pro stock class off the ground. Up until then, best you have was super stock before you got into fuel, alcohol, and nitro. And I think it's a matter of perspective, and I think sometimes we forget about how engines changed in different eras. Pre-smog, after smog. Same cubic inch displacement, half the horsepower, 60% of the torque. Now that's what I like to look at. He raised a very good point. And yeah, back in the day, I was actually going to do a video on that one of these days. I was going to call it a shout out to the little guys, the guys with the Vegas, the Pintos, the Mavericks, even a few Gremlins we saw that had small blocks in them built. And they ran well. They ran well. Cars are fairly light. And a lot of them, you couldn't stuff a big block under the hood of those things. Although there was one guy in the city that had a Vega with a 396 in it, but then again, I had no window fender wells. Everything was cut out of that fucking thing. It ran well. It had a 396 in it. And fender well had this thing was fucking mean looking too. It wasn't tubbed. They weren't really tubbing then. They just had narrowed rear ends. You could tuck the tires in a little bit, get those, Pro Track 50s or Super Stock Formula 150s or Mickey Thompson 50s. So they wouldn't be rubbing the wheel bars and wouldn't be sticking way out. And depends what you're talking about, what years. He raised a point. He said, well, you don't have to spend a lot of money on a 305 or a 318 to get them to run with a big inch engine. Very, very true. But what big inch engine are you talking about? You're talking about a 60s up until 1970 big inch engine making a ton of horsepower and a ton of torque, whether they're Ford, Chrysler, Chevy, AMC with their 390s and 401s. What kind of big inch engine are you talking about? By 71 already things started going. I think Mopars the only one that held on to their 426 Hemi at the same horsepower and torque rating as they did in 1970. By 72, we know what happened. The Cobra Jet 428 went away. 71, they were going to have a hard time. Already, new smog emissions restrictions were being put in place in 71. And some engines even earlier in 70 and 69 were already having little add-ons to it. Especially around the intake manifold, the EGR valves, EFE valves. Catalytic converters didn't hit every car until 1975. 1974 was the last year that you could get real dual exhaust on a Z28, a Firebird, Trans Am, any car that normally had, true dual exhaust. By 1975, everything was pretty much a single exhaust. That 2-into-1 catalytic converter run out, two exhausts, two tailpipes, hey, dual exhaust, But it was really a single exhaust, and that catalytic converter choked off a lot of horsepower. And these numbers were way down. Pontiac hung around with, a 400 and a 455 until 1976 when it discontinued it. And that was the same. You got a Trans Am with a 455. That was the same 455 they put in a Grand Prix, a Bonneville, a station wagon. It was no high performance engine. It was your basic passenger car engine, 200 horsepower, and something like 320 pound-feet of torque. Compare that to a 1970 HO 455. Whoa! Can't even compare the two. Same thing with the 400. Olds hung around with a 403 for a little while. They even started putting Olds 403 small blocks in Pontiac Trans Ams and other Pontiac models in 1979. Pontiac discontinued their engine production in 1978. Take a 400, you know. By the way, the Cobra Jet 429 is not a bored out 428. It was a different block. It was based on the tall deck 460 block. It actually had a longer stroke than the CJ 428. Made less horsepower, but it made more torque. And it was a pretty decent engine, you know. Pontiac had to drop the Ram Air Series engine in 1970 because it wasn't going to meet the new mandates, you know, for emissions in 1971 already. That's when this HO 455 that was already in GTO in 1970, but you couldn't get it in the Trans Am. Pontiac was kind of weird with that. They offered certain engines and only certain models. I don't know, marketing strategy. Well, they always wanted to keep the GTO as the top dog performer in the Pontiac line. That's why when you look at engine for engine, whether it was an HO series, HO 350, HO 400, you know, Ram Air 3, Ram Air 4, it always had a 10 horsepower higher rating in a GTO than the Firebird. Same engine. What they do is they fuck with the carburetor wing, because a lot of guys figured this out. You know, when you're in the car and you're mashing the pedal to the floor, you're assuming that that carburetor is opening wide open. When you're under the hood and you grab that throttle cable like this, you pull it, you want to take a look down there, everything's opened up, right? What you're not seeing is what's going on when you're driving it and you mash that pedal to the floor. On a GTO, those throats were wide open. On a Trans Am Firebird, they were opening to about 80%. They purposely did that. And that's where your 10 horsepower loss was. A lot of guys figured that shit out. Hey, wait a minute, man. They just did a little something with the linkage, instant 10 horsepower. But they wanted the GTO to be the top dog performer in the Pontiac line. They played little tricks with that. That's why the GTO got the HO 455 first in 1970. Even though you could still get a Ram Air 3 or 4, you know, GTO. Trans Am, most you could get was a 4, and most of them on the street were Ram Air 3. You didn't see a whole lot of Ram Air 4s being produced. 1971, the Ram Air was gone. They knew it wasn't going to meet federal mandate standards for emissions. 71 or 72, the HO 455 became the standard engine in the Trans Am. By then it was down to 330 horsepower versus the 370 horsepower it was rated at in the GTO the previous year. Now don't forget, these are net numbers now. They say there's a 15% tack on. Add 15% to 330, and the engine was still good. It still produced a decent amount of torque, and those cars were still strong runners in very low 14s. The cars were no slouch, you know. Although 71 Ford too, you know, I don't think people realize that one of the quickest Fords produced was in 1971, Boss 351 at Cleveland. The thing could dip into 13.6, 13.7 easily at like 107 miles an hour. It was quicker than a CJ 428. It was quicker than a CJ 429. It was quicker than a Boss 429. They didn't sell a whole lot of them. I think a lot of people didn't like the new 71 styling. It was a love it or hate it type new redesign. They didn't make a whole lot of the Boss 351s either, even though they still had a Cobra Jet 429 and a 71 Mark 1, and we know what happened by 72 and 73. They were putting 302s with 2 barrels in them, you know? And it became more of a aesthetic appearance package and a real performance package. But that's what happened to most cars. You know, the Volare and Aspens became, you know, road runners, and and then the Mitsubishis came along and took up the Challenger, you know, and Charger name and shit. A lot of shit went down in the 70s that really fucked things up. But this guy was talking about, well, yeah, it's true you can, but depending on what big block engine you're talking about, you know, how much money could you get a 305? Let's say some guy pulls a 305 out of an 84, you know, Z28. Remember when those came out? I know my friend's sister had one. Had that crossfire induction, that new crossfire induction. Was it 80? Is it 82? Yeah, 82. Because the Corvette had the 82 crossfire induction engine. No 83 because he had problems with body fit and production with the new C4 that came out in 84. They dumped that crossfire 305 real quick. 305 and 350. I think they had 350 in the Corvette. Z28 Camaro Trans Am only got the 305 version. But things, you know, 190 horsepower, 180 horsepower. Torque numbers were down under 300. You know, let's say you pull one of those 305s out. And he mentioned a 318. You pull a 318 out, what's that, 318, 160 horse, something like that. You know what I mean? And his point was, well, yeah, you didn't have to spend a lot of money to get 305 or 318 to run with a big inch engine. Very, very true. But what big inch engine are you talking about? What production era? Okay, you take that 305 or 318, you cam it. You don't have to, a little bore, go 30. You don't have to go crazy with it. A little bit of a bore. Give a few more cubic inches, cam it. Good intake, good induction, good carb, good exhaust system. A little bit of gear in the back, good transmission, Yeah, you can. Wow, I blew off a guy in a 76 Trans Am with a 455. Yeah, pushing 200 horsepower. Not a whole lot of torque. In a very heavy car. You know what I mean? That's really nothing to brag about. Now go up against the 1969, 68, 67 produced Pontiac 400. Any big inch engine by any manufacturer in that era. Bone stock. Bone stock. You still gonna run with that? With that 318, 305 that you put some money into, not a whole lot, but you put a little money into it. You're not gonna run with those engines. Once you have that engine in a very light car and you're going up a car that weighs 37, 38, 3,900 pounds, now you might have a chance. I can't help it. Cubic inches. Even Bill Jenkins found that out with his 327, as much success as he had. They found out in racing, cubic inches. Especially in pro stock. That's always been my favorite category until now. Now I can't even recognize these cars anymore. But back in the day, these were cars that, like they say, win on Sunday, sell on Monday, NASCAR, that's their phrase. But these were Dusters, Cudas, Novas, Camaros, Chevelles, Challengers. These were cars that you saw right on the street. Guys, you could put your snorkel hood scoop on it, jack it up, put some big tires on it, put a crazy paint job on it, put a decent engine in it, and you could really relate to what you were seeing at a track, except you didn't have all the stickers all over it and you weren't getting sponsorship, I found the cars are more relatable today. I can't identify with anything in pro stock these days. The only reason I follow Top Fuel is, I see what my buddy Bobby Task is doing with his nitro fish. But you're talking apples and oranges, and I think people don't stop and realize, just because it's got a lot of cubic inches doesn't mean it's making a lot of power. And that can be very deceiving to people. So now you want to compare a small block that you put money into, even though it's not a fortune, and now you go up against a big block. It's got many more cubic inches than you. But he's only making the same horsepower as you, maybe even less. You know what I mean? Yeah, you can get that 318 or that 305 to make 250, 260 horse, which is more than these 400s and 455s and everything else that was coming out of Ford and Chrysler. I think Chrysler already dropped their 400 by, 1974, and they were going in Cordobas and shit like that. You know what I mean? We're talking apples and oranges in many aspects that I don't think people really stop and think about. They just hear cubic inches and automatically assume it's got a lot of cubic inches, it makes a ton of horsepower, it makes a ton of torque, and that is not true. They only did up into a certain year. And after that now is where everything gets thrown out of balance, And bigger was not necessarily better. Well, era for era, yeah, it was better, And the small block engines produced in that era, yeah, big block was better. But they were only as good, and in many cases, not as good as, like with the 318, man. People on here are trying to really promote that 318 to make it become desirable, to raise the value. Why? Because they got a shit pile of them sitting in their fucking yard nobody wants. So they're hoping to try to pump it up and glorify it and increase the value so maybe somebody will want to fucking buy it, because as of now, they can't give those fucking things away. So they want to glorify that 318. I knew back in the day, like I said, man, on that video, I know guys that they had a 307 in there, Nova, Malibu, Camaro they bought. That came out. They didn't want to cam it and bore it. No. They wanted a 327, 350. And many guys would rather have a 283 to dig their hands into. Mopar guys, I know Mopar guys. 318. I'd rather have a 273 Commando. I'd rather invest money in building a 273 Commando. Those are good engines. You know, I knew a guy that had a Dot Swinger. It's that plum crazy purple, white vinyl top, stripe across the back, 2 scoops. He had a 4-speed bench seat. I knew guys who were roadrunners who were very stripped down, plain Jane. No carpeting, like a rubber fucking floor mat and things, like Rubbermaid mats. What the fuck? Door panels, you could practically poke your finger through them. No frills, no fancy, no nothing. But they were very light cars. And, you know, you had your 383, your 440s, your Hemis. But in these little ones, the Swingers, this one, I don't know much about Dusters. Had a 273 Commando. It was actually a 340. Originally, it was a 340. It had the badges on the hood and everything. Nice looking car. I really like those cars. Those 1970 Swinger. Really cool car. But I remember it was real stripped down, bunch bench seat, 4-speed on the floor, door panel, AM radio, no frills, no nothing. And it was originally a 340. When he bought it, the engine was kind of real shaky. I said, how can we put a 273 in this thing? He says, I looked around for another 340, and I really didn't want to spend a whole lot of money. And he said, 318's junk. Found a 273 Commando, 4-barrel. I guess they had put in other models. And he went with a 273 and just freshened it up a little bit, give it a fresh hone. You know what I mean? Throw a little cam in it. Some good intake, good induction headers. And I already had, I think it was like a 355 gear in it. And what a close ratio, 4-speed. And he says, this is where I went. And I know many Mopar guys said that if they were going to spend money on a car back then, they would rather put it into a 273 than a 318. I'm going by what, I'm not a Mopar guy. I'm only going by what I saw, heard, observed during that time, you know. And somebody else raised a good point in a comment. I really enjoy a lot of comments. I find them to be very thought-provoking and interesting. And it kind of opens a window of how people can perceive things and kind of judge something without really looking at what they really were and assuming big cubic inch engine automatically has a lot of horsepower, automatically has a lot of torque. Well, that was very true, you know, until you got to 1972. And then everything changed. Cubic inches really didn't mean much anymore. Cubic inches didn't really mean much anymore. 1974 was the last year for the 454 with Chevy in the Corvette. It's down to 270 horsepower. The 350 was 250. And they say the 350 was actually a better engine. It was down on horsepower, but it was much lighter and the car handled better. The big blocks, those big block Stingrays, they really didn't, they were kind of nose heavy, you know. Even earlier on, a lot of guys, you know, 427 Stingrays, you know, a lot of guys would prefer the 350, 360 horse 327. It was a little bit lighter. And the handling was a little bit better. They weren't so nose heavy with that big, heavy 450, 427 in there. They only had that one year, 396, 425 horse. They only put that in the Corvette in that one year, 1965. And, but this perception of, you know, how things are being promoted and pushed by certain people in here, because that's all they have. They know they got it for nothing. They know that no matter how much money they would have to put a ton of, oh yeah, I heard, there were guys with 318s running 11s. What has been done to it? What has been done to that engine? It was not cheap. What kind of a car is it in? Is it something that's been really lightened up? Like something that Sanford did with his fucking Plan 9 from outer space that looked like it got attacked by a pack of angry woodpeckers on meth with all holes in it. Car was completely fucking gutted. That car was not structurally safe. Wait till 2,700 pounds. Yeah, okay. Maybe you'll get that car into a low 12 and 11 with a 318, and you still got a lot of work into it. You know what I mean? I'm not one that really likes to compare. Well, I do have a bias. I'm more of a big block guy, you know. And I've seen guys with small blocks. I have friends with small blocks that put more money into their small block building them than guys put into a 396, 427, 454, Pontiac 400, even a Ford 390 FE. Those are great fucking engines. And they couldn't run with these guys. And they had twice the money into their small block than these guys had into their big blocks. And they couldn't run with these guys. I'm not saying that they were, you know, they were gapped by half a track. But they couldn't run within a car length of these guys. And it costs them more money with their small block. At least that's my experience in my lifetime, what I've actually seen, experienced, been around, saw a race, saw the competition between the two, and saw the money that was spent into these engines by these guys. And I saw the end result they got. Today, like I say, well, yeah, it's going to cost you a lot of money. Go out and find a nice LS6, 454, or an SCJ 428, or a Hemi, 440, or W30 455 rocket, not like the one Jabba has in his fucking Delta. I mean, yeah, true, it's going to cost you a lot of money to find one of these. But if you get one, it's in decent shape. You don't have to put a lot of money into it. Just a little freshening up. Just a little freshening up. You can do it for under $1,000. Some guy with a 318, we're going to be boring it, honing it, cutting down the heads, doing a 3-angle valve job, raise your compression. Oh, now you got to do it. You'll end up spending as much, if not more. And the car will not run as good. It will not be as quick, will not be as fast. If you think I'm wrong, tell me. It's quite all right. I've been wrong before in my life. It won't be the first time, won't be the last time. I won't be humiliated. I can deal with it. But I'm glad I got that comment and a few other comments. It's just to throw something out to think about. Like I say, I find it very thought-provoking. And it makes me take a look at things and examine things and say, wait a minute, no, yeah. On the surface, it may seem like, oh, yeah, well, you can do very little to a small block to get it to run like a big block. On the surface, that sounds very feasible. Sounds very feasible, very possible. But now when you dig into the dynamics of it and what would need to be done, then you look at what these engines started out as and what condition they are in now. One's been highly modified or even lightly modified. The other one is completely stock. Pre-smog, stock, that small block doesn't have a chance. After smog years, yeah. Now it don't take much. You get a 318 or a 305 to run with any Pontiac 400, 455 olds, 403. It won't take much to run with them and even beat them. Very true.